Midos are very, very intense. We've covered, at least at the first round, we've covered Kal V'chomer, Gezei Reshava, Binyan Av, Mikosov Echad, Binyan Av, Mishnei Kesuvim. Just to remind you, Binyan Av, Mishnei Kesuvim, which I'm not going to repeat the explanation, is what the Gemara refers to as Tzad HaShaveh Shebahem. So there's a lot of synonymous words here. Kal V'chomer is the same as Kol Shekain. Binyan Av is the same as Mamatzinu. Binyan Av Mishnei Kesuvim is the same as Tzad HaShaveh. So when you see the different words, you shouldn't get confused. They are basically referring to the same thing. But what I want to talk about today is actually something connected to the Parsha, which is indirectly connected to our learning of Torah Shebaal Peh. Because remember that the Rambam begins his Hakdama with a very important yesod, that prophecy has no connection to the halachic process at all. A Navi cannot be machriya any halacha based on prophecy. That is a violation of Lo Bashamayim Hi. And this breaks down into two different components. A Navi cannot change a halacha, such as take away a mitzvah. So if a Navi were to say that Shabbos should be kept on Sunday, even if he does a miracle, even if he does miracles, because miracles can be optical illusions, miracles can be kaichas of Tumah, even if he does miracles, by definition, a Navi that is oiker, a mitzvah min HaTorah, is a Navi sheker. But not only that, not only can't a Navi be oiker a mitzvah, a Navi cannot even be machriya in a machlokas. If you have a machlokas poskim, machlokas tanoim, machlokas amoraim, and the Navi is not changing halacha, the Navi is simply telling you, oh, I have been avua that you should paskin like so-and-so. That's also included in Lo Bashamayim Hi, and he is treated as a Navi sheker, regardless of whatever miracles he does. This is very, very important. People will say to you, so a Christian might say to you, oh, how can you not believe in Jesus? He did a lot of miracles. Now, so one response might be, who says he did a lot of miracles? They say it? Who says it's true? But there's actually another answer. Even if it is true, so what? The Torah itself acknowledges that Ovdei Avodah Zarah might have a kalach to do miracles. It might be kishuf. It might be a way of Hashem testing us. Miracles do not make or break your emunah in Torah's Hashem. So even if Yashka did whatever he did, which, as I say, we have no reason to believe that he did it, but even if he did what he did, it makes no difference. You can't change the Torah. So these are the two components of Lo Bashmayim. So what I want to talk about in the Parsha is a particular mechanism that was a unique prophetic mechanism that existed in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Big Day Kahuna, and this is the Urim v'Tumim that the Kohen Gadol wore. Right, the Kohen Gadol had a special uniform of 8 garments, and one of the garments of the Kohen Gadol is the Choshen. The Choshen is the breastplate. And on the Choshen there are 12 jewels that are arrayed in 4 rows of 3 each. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? 4 rows of 3. On each of the stones was engraved a name of one of the Shiftei Yisrael. Ruvain on stone 1, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. Now, these stones were precious stones. I mean, today some of them might be semi-precious. I mean, onyx, for example, but there were diamonds, rubies, emeralds. The translations are not all clear, but these were very, very precious. And in addition to the 12 Shvatim, there were other phrases there. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and the words Shiftei Yeshurun. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Shiftei Yeshurun, the upright tribes of Israel. Now, there's a machlekes rishonim. How did they position? These are engraved letters. How did they engrave the Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and the Shiftei Yeshurun? The Rambam understands that on Ruvain's stone, which is the first stone, Above Reuven's name is Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. And on Binyamin's stone, which is the last stone, after Binyamin's name, are the words Shiftei Yeshurun. So Reuven's stone has Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov before Reuven's name, on top of Reuven's name. And Binyamin's stone has Shiftei Yeshurun under Binyamin's name. That's how the Rambam learns. Rabbeinu Bechaya brings a different shita, in which the way it works is every stone has to have 6 letters on it. So if you multiply 12 by 6, that's 72, and that's the 72-letter name of God, which is a particular name of Hashem. So the way it works is this. Let's take Reuven. Reuven is 5 letters. Reish, Aleph, Vav, Beis, Nun. So 5 letters, and then an Aleph for Avraham, first letter of Avraham. Shimon is 5 letters. Then you put the Beis, the second letter of Avraham. Levi is only 3 letters, so you put the Reish, Hey, Mem, which finishes Avraham's name, right? Reuven, Shimon, Levi. Yehuda is 5 letters, so you put the Yud of Yitzchak. Yisachar is 5 letters, so you put the Tzadik of Yitzchak. Zavulon is 6 letters, so it has no letter at all. Okay, without going through all the tribes, you get the idea. The idea is that instead of having a complete Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Shiftei Yeshurun, you went with an idea that each stone had 6 letters. So if the Shevet was less than 6, you would add a letter into the Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Shiftei Yeshurun. Be it as it may, if I would have a PowerPoint, I would show you, you managed to finish everything. In fact, you managed to finish Shiftei Yeshurun by Yosef's stone. So in point of fact, there's nothing on Binyamin's stone, because Binyamin too is 6 letters. Okay, so everyone understand the Machlokes, Rambam, and the Rabbeinu Bechaya, as to how the words Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Shiftei Yeshurun were engraved on the stones of the Choshen. Now, the Torah then says, you shall put in the Choshen the Urim v'Tumim. So this already tells you that a common error that people make is incorrect. A lot of people think Urim v'Tumim is synonymous to the Choshen. It is not. The Torah says you put the Urim v'Tumim in the Choshen. What do we mean in the Choshen? Because the Choshen folded up, meaning the Choshen is a breastplate, but the bottom half folded up so it could be a receptacle in back of the breastplate. And the Urim v'Tumim was put in the folds of the Choshen. What is the Urim v'Tumim? So the Urim v'Tumim is a piece of parchment, and on the parchment there are special shemos of Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and other shemos of Hashem. And the Urim v'Tumim, lahavdil, could be described as the software that activated the Choshen as the hardware. When the Urim v'Tumim was put there, that created an aspect of prophetic revelation that came through the stones of the Choshen, in which somebody would ask the Kohen Gadol a question, and the letters of the Urim of the Shvatim would light up and spell out an answer. Okay, so the Urim v'Tumim is what enabled the Avnei Choshen to communicate prophetic responses. I don't know if anyone here went to Yale University, or perhaps you know this. If you look at the motto of Yale University, it actually is Hebrew letters, Urim v'Tumim. Urim v'Tumim is the motto of Yale University, based on the idea that Urim means light, and Tumim is perfect. Perfect light A little arrogant for a university to make that claim. But we call our Urim V'Tumim because it was a light that brought a complete prophecy into the world. So, the Gemara says in Maseches Cedar that there was no Urim V'Tumim in the Bayis Sheni. So I've heard people say, even rabbis say, oh, the Kohen Gadol didn't have the breastplate in the Bayis Sheni. Totally incorrect. He certainly had the breastplate because, number one, it's one of the necessary begadim of a Kohen Gadol. You have to have it. And even if you're going to tell me the original one was lost, make another one. So there's no reason in the world why the Kohen Gadol wouldn't have the breastplate in the Bayis Sheni. But what it means is prophecy stopped existing in the beginning of the Bayis Sheni. So the Urim V'Tumim no longer activated the Avnei HaChoshen. The letters didn't light up anymore. Okay, that's what it means when it says there was no Urim V'Tumim in the Bayis Sheni. Either that means the parchment was lost, which is one possibility, or it could mean even if they had the parchment, it was no longer activating anything because this was part of prophecy. But the Avnei HaChoshen, for sure they had. They had to have the Avnei HaChoshen. That's part of the Big Day Kahuna. And the Avodah is puzzle. If a Kohen is not wearing the proper Big Day Kahuna, the whole Avodah is puzzle. So, obviously, the Kohen Gadol had the Avnei Choshen. So be sure you know the difference between Urim V'Tumim and Avnei Choshen. Now, what was the process of asking the Urim V'Tumim? So first of all, you understand that you can't ask the Urim V'Tumim an essay question. Because by definition, you have a limited number of letters, and the letters can only spell short words. So essentially, Urim V'Tumim is a whole skill. You had to ask questions that could be answered fundamentally, yes or no. Cain, lo. Cain, Yisachar, Naphtali, right? The letters would light up. You couldn't ask questions that required long answers. That's why we had Nevi'im for the longer answers and the like. The second aspect of the Urim V'Tumim is you have to be very, very exact in the questions that you ask. For example, in the book of Shoftim, we read that the Jewish people ask the Urim V'Tumim through the Urim, asking Hashem really, through the Urim V'Tumim, they ask, should they go to war against a certain enemy? And the answer was yes, go to war. They then went to war and they lost. So they went back and said, hey, you told us we can go to war. He says, well, you didn't ask me if you'd win. So you have to ask a follow-up question. Shall we go to war? Will we be victorious? You have to ask exact questions. Now, the third point about the Urim V'Tumim is that you couldn't go for private questions. You couldn't go, for example, what yeshiva should I go to? You could go to a Navi. The Vilna Gaon says, when there was Nevuah, you could go to a Navi for private hadracha that could get messages from Hashem. Hashem has told me you should do this. Amazing thing. Mamish, a definitive answer. That was the gift of Nevuah. Nevuah, now, those Nevuahs are not written down. The Gemara in Megillah says there were many, many Nevi'im. But the only Nevi'im that are in Tanakh are the Nevi'im whose message has eternal validity. Which means there were many Nevi'im that, gave you an answer. What yeshiva you should go to. Should you take that job? Should you move to Baltimore or Milwaukee? You could ask a Navi. But that's not in Tanakh because that's not a message for us. Which means actually every message in Tanakh, even though it's also referring to specific historical events, you have to understand, right? If it's describing a war against Assyria, it has to have something that applies to me. Because if it was only about a war against Assyria, it wouldn't have been recorded in Tanakh because there were many, many prophecies that are not recorded. So a Navi could give you private advice, but the Urim V'Tumim could not be used for private advice. The Urim V'Tumim has to be questions that impact on Klal Yisrael. Did you want to say that?
If you could only ask the Urim V'Tumim yes or no questions, why would you need any more than just 2 stones? Yes.
Well, okay, I mean, I exaggerated a little bit. I didn't mean it had to be literally yes or no, but it had to be something that could be spelled out within those letters. You do have all the letters of the Aleph base happen to be there, but, you know, you can't, I mean, imagine this. I mean, if you had to have a 10-page answer, it would take like 2 hours. You know, the screen flashes. So, I mean, it had to be relatively short. It didn't have to be a yes or a no. Yeah.
Was there once a case where with the Urim and Tumim, I think the letters got mixed up, just called one thing, and then interpreted it?
Yes. So that's the other point I want to make. And that is that even with the Urim and Tumim, it took a special level of Ruach HaKodesh to determine the sequence of the letters. Because the letters light up, spelling out words, but the order of the tribes with the letters may not correspond to the actual message. So as a result, there had to be a Ruach HaKodesh to know how to rearrange the letters. There's a very famous vort from the Vilna Gaon that explains at the beginning of Shmuel that this was a mistake that Eli made. If you remember, Chana was a woman who was barren for many, many years. And she went to the Mishkan in Shiloh, this is before the Beis HaMikdash, to pray. And we learn all the laws of Shemona Esrei from Chana's prayer. Her lips were moving, but her voice could not be heard. And Eli, who was the Kohen Gadol, thought she was drunk. And she said, so he said, get out of here, you're drunk. And she said, your Ruach HaKodesh has left you. You don't know what I'm going through. So the Vilna Gaon explains that when Eli sees this woman and he's not sure if she's drunk or she's davening or whatever she's doing, he asked the Urim V'Tumim. Now, of course, this is actually a kasha on what I just said. You can't ask the Urim V'Tumim for a private question. Okay, that's another question. Okay, but he asked, and he got the letters Shin, Chaf, Yisachar, Shin, Chaf, Reish, Ruvain, and Hey, Yehuda. Shin, Chaf, Reish, Hey. Those letters spell Shikora, drunk. But if you rearrange the letters, the same letters, it can spell Kishera. She is a kosher woman, or you could even read a Kisara. She is like Sarah Imenu. And Eli's mistake was, he took the letters and he interpreted Shikora, when in fact it was Kishera. Right? So the Vilna Gaon says that it took a special level of Ruach HaKodesh. Now, there are other machloksim about the Choshen and the Urim V'Tumim. Very interesting. And that is, when the letters lit up, who saw the letters lighting up? In other words, if you're the Melech, let's say, or you're the Nasi, and you're asking on behalf of the Jewish people a legitimate question that the Urim V'Tumim answers by letters lighting up and spelling words, did the observer see the letters light up, or only the Kohen Gadol? In other words, did everybody see the letters light up, or only the Kohen Gadol saw the letters, and you did not see the letters light up? And if it's only the Kohen Gadol, how does the Kohen Gadol know what the letters say? I mean, it's a little difficult unless you're very dexterous. If I have the Choshen on my chest and letters light up, it might be a little hard for me to see what letters have lit up unless I look in a mirror. So that's another question. How did the Kohen Gadol himself see the letters? And if the observer saw the letters, the observer could tell the Kohen Gadol what the letters were, and then the Kohen Gadol could use Ruach HaKodesh to determine the proper sequencing of the letters. So there's a lot of uncertainties regarding the Urim V'Tumim, but the most important point to remember is it was a form of prophecy, and as a result, when we lost prophecy, we lost the Urim V'Tumim, or the power of the Urim V'Tumim. Maybe we had the parchment, who knows, we don't know for sure, but the Choshen and the stones of the Choshen, we 100% had. Yeah.
If Rabbi could answer public and private questions, what was the function of the Urim V'Tumim? If we asked everything to the nothing.
Yeah, so the question is, why do you need the Urim V'Tumim? Meaning, if you have a lot of Nevi'im, what is the purpose of the Urim V'Tumim? I don't have a precise answer to that. It seems Hashem wanted there to be a special designated prophetic Gilui Shechina in the Beis HaMikdash proper, as opposed to the Nevi'im who were not living in the Beis HaMikdash. This was connected to the Avodah of the Beis HaMikdash. By the way, there's a reference in the book of Ezra, which describes the Jews who are returning to Eretz Yisrael after the 70 years of the Babylonian exile. And it lists all the different families, Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, Mamzerim, everybody. But there's a group of people who thought they were Kohanim, and they were not able to prove it with documentation. See, today, if you being a Kohen, you don't need to prove anything. You show up in Shul and you say you're a Kohen, no questions asked. But when there's a Beis HaMikdash, it's not so easy. You cannot just show up in the Beis HaMikdash and say, I'm a Kohen. In order to do avoda in the Beis HaMikdash, you have to present definitive proof that you're a Kohen. And if you could not present that proof, you would not be allowed to work in the Beis HaMikdash. So it's not like today where it's only a question of an aliyah. It's all right, so we'll give you an aliyah. You say you're a Kohen. Right? It's not a big sin if you're not a Kohen. But for avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, eating truma, the standards of evidence were very tough. And the book of Ezra records that there were families who considered themselves Kohanim who would not be able to prove it, to be able to work in the new Beis HaMikdash. So it says there, you will not be able to serve until the Kohen Gadol has the Urim V'Tumim restored, and he will then be able to verify your yichus. So that's an explicit reference that in the second Beis HaMikdash, we did not have the Urim V'Tumim, and it's not going to be restored until Mashiach, till the third Beis HaMikdash. By the way, you may ask me a question. So according to that pasuk in Ezra, if I don't know if you're a Kohen or not, we could ask the Urim V'Tumim, and the Urim V'Tumim would give us an answer. Is that a violation of Lo B'Shamayim? I mean, are you using Nevuah to paskin a halacha that somebody's a Kohen? The answer is no. That's a factual question. Yeah, you have to understand that there's a difference between a fact and a halachic conclusion. Meaning the following. If a Navi were to tell me that this piece of meat on your plate happens to be pork, and I know that b'nevuah, you actually should believe him. Because he's not telling you a halacha. Everyone knows the halacha, you can't eat pork. He's just telling you the mitzias. Nevuah can tell you a mitzias. Now, same thing. If we don't know if you're a Kohen or a Yisrael, and a Navi tells you b'nevuah that you are a Kohen, that's a factual question. You are descended from Aaron as opposed to being descended from somebody else. So nevuah can be used to clarify factual uncertainty, even though that will have halachic implications. But when we know the mitzias, I know what this is, but we have a machlokas what the halacha is about this mitzias. Right? If a sukkah is more than 20 amos, I know what I'm looking at. I'm looking at a sukkah more than 20 amos. We have a halachic disagreement, whether it's a kosher sukkah or not a kosher sukkah. That a Navi cannot tell you. But let's assume I have a big sukkah and I can't measure if it's 20 or not. I don't know if it's 19 or 20. And the Navi says, with Ruach HaKodesh, I can tell you it's 19. You could believe him, because that is a question of mitzias rather than a question of halacha. So to use the Urim V'Tumim to be machriya that somebody's a Kohen is not a violation of Lo B'Shamayim. In fact, let me give you another example of this. In the beginning of Maseches Brachos, so Rav Yasi recounts that he wanted to daven in an abandoned, ruined building. And Eliyahu Hanavi told him, there are 3 reasons you're not allowed to daven in a chorva. One reason is the danger of the falling stones. The other is people will suspect immorality, that you have a girlfriend in there or something. And the third reason is there are demons, whatever that means, mazikim. And therefore, Eliyahu Navi says, the halacha is you are not allowed to daven in this place. And if you remember, the Gemara goes over nafkaminas, why do you need 3 reasons, etc. Now, the Achronim ask a kasha, how can I accept the halacha of Eliyahu Navi, who's speaking as a Navi? Lo b'shamayim. But if you think about it, Eliyahu Navi is not really teaching me a halacha. I already know the halacha that you're not allowed to endanger yourself. And I know the halacha that you're not allowed to do something that people think is immoral. He didn't create the halacha. The halacha is a known halacha. He's just telling me, factually, a chorva is dangerous and a chorva causes people to be suspicious of you. In other words, he is simply connecting the metzias with an already known halachic principle. And therefore, Maritz Chia says, that is not a lo b'shamayim. Yeah.
Sometimes when you have tours, they go to the ruin of the ancient synagogue and pray there. Is that awesome?
Well, the issue would be, first of all, the reason of suspicion is only when you go in alone. So when you're going in with a group, that reason is gone anyway. The reason of danger, you rely on the Antiquities Authority, meaning to say, I assume they only allow you to tour in a place that has been, repaired and set up to be safe, right? They won't allow you to go into a dangerous ruin. So in a situation where the ruin itself is under a government supervision, so that takes away the sakana. And if you're going with a group, that takes away the marasayan, the suspicion of doing something that is immoral. Okay? Alrighty. Okay, so that's a little bit. Now, another interesting aspect, which is not about the choshen only, but Big Day Kahuna generally, is that the garments of the Kohen Gadol actually contained mixtures of wool and linen. Quite amazing. We know there's an Isser D'Oraisa of wearing shatnez. Not allowed to wear shatnez. Now, again, I've gotten questions about this. There is no Isser of shatnez in things you're not wearing. You're allowed to have wool and linen curtains, right? You're allowed to have wool and linen, whatever, wall hangings, whatever it would be. The Isser is garments that you wear. Okay. But the Kohen Gadol is wearing these garments, and they are still a mixture of wool and linen. So what you see here is, again, this is a very Kabbalistic in terms of fully understanding it, that the Beis HaMikdash is a place where opposite forces that normally have to be apart are able to be brought together in a harmonious unity. That the Beis HaMikdash takes even things that normally repel each other, because you're in the presence of Hashem, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu can take even opposites and bring them together. But there's a fascinating machlokes, the Rambam and the Ravid. What is the din if a Kohen Gadol wears Big Day Kahuna when he is not engaged in the temple service? In other words, he finished the korbanos, and now he's sitting down for a coffee break. And he didn't bother to take off the Big Day Kahuna. The Rambam says the whole heter of shatnez in Big Day Kahuna is only when he's doing the Avodah. So since, in order to do the Avodah, he has to wear these garments, the positive mitzvah of Avodah overrides the negative prohibition of shatnez. But if he wears the garments 1 minute more than is necessary for the Avodah, he will get malchus for wearing shatnez. That is the shita of the Rambam, and that is what is called dechuya. Dechuya means there is an isser of shatnez, but it gets set aside for the mitzvah of Avodah, and when you no longer have that reason, he's going to get malchus. The Ravid takes a different position. The Ravid holds big shatnez in Big Day Kahuna is hutra. Hutra means the Torah says on these garments there is no Isser of Shatnez. The Torah took off the Isser of Shatnez on these garments, whether he's doing a mitzvah with them or whether he's not. So that's an interesting machlokas of Bigdei Kahuna Shalai B'Shas Avayda. Yeah.
How does the Rambam explain the story of Shimon HaTzadik?
Yeah, that's a good question. Shimon HaTzadik going out in the Bigdei Kahuna. Yeah, so the question would be that perhaps Shimon HaTzadik wore the garments that the Kohen Gadol wears on Yom Kippur. Maybe not all of the 8 garments. The Yom Kippur garments are pure linen. So when it says Begadim, because on Yom Kippur the Kohen Gadol had 2 uniforms. And perhaps he went out on Yom Kippur. Yeah, you had a hand up? Yeah. Oh, Manish. Same question. Wow. Well, great minds think alike. Okay. Alrighty. So now, let me just mention one other ha'ara, a very interesting ha'ara of the Chasam Sofer. I had mentioned that on the Avnei Choshen, you had Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and on the last stone, Shiftei Yeshurun. And let's follow the Rambam Shita, as opposed to Rabbeinu Bechaya, that on Ruvain's stone is Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. On Binyamin's stone is Shiftei Yeshurun. But the Rambam, although the Rambam sets it up that way, the Rambam actually says on Binyamin's stone was not the word Shiftei Yeshurun, but Shiftei Ka, Yud Hey. And the kasha on the Rambam is obvious. The Gemara itself says that the Avnei Choshen was Shiftei Yeshurun. Where does the Rambam get Shiftei Ka? So, Chasam Sofer connects it to a story in Maseches Kedushin, and I'm sure you know the story, you learned the story. When the Gemara discusses Kibbud Aviyim, it uses as an example a non-Jew who lived in Ashkelon, and his name was Dama ben Nisina. And it mentions that one time, this is during the second Beis HaMikdash, the stone of Binyamin popped out of the Choshen, and it got lost. So they needed to replace the stone of Binyamin. That's called Yoshva. Some say it's a diamond, and some say it's a multicolored jewel that we don't even have today. Binyamin's stone was lost. And apparently the only person who had such a precious stone was Dama ben Nisina. So they went to him, they offered him a lot of money. But the key to the jewelry case was under his father's pillow. His father was sleeping. He did not wake up his father, even though he lost a huge amount of money. And this is an example of Kibbud Aviyim. And as a reward, the next year, he got a para aduma, which also was worth a lot of money, and he was able to get all the money that he lost. Now, the truth of the matter is, the story of Dama ben Nisina is actually halachically problematical. I mean, let's say somebody offers you $2 million, but you turn it down because your father is sleeping, you don't want to wake him up and take the key. So dad wakes up. You say, Dad, you don't know what I did for you. He says, we were offered $2 million, and I turned it down because I didn't want to wake you up. I mean, let me ask you, would your father be happy, or would he say, what type of idiot are you? You know. So that's actually a kasha l'maisa. It's not so clear that Dama ben Nisina did the right thing. But okay. But nevertheless, his heart was in a good place, and he certainly showed how much he was willing to give up for Kibbud Aviyim. Yeah.
How do you know that he even told his father? If he doesn't know, that it wouldn't really be a problem.
You know, you're right, but on the other hand, here's the question. In terms of Kibbud Aviyim, if I know that my father would want to be woken up, so what's the proper response? Should I say, out of honor, I'm not going to wake him up? Or is the honorable thing to wake him up? In other words, even if he didn't know, but if I know that if he knew he would want to be woken up, I mean, you're correct. I mean, actually, you are correct. In other words, once I turned down $2 million, I shouldn't tell my father. I agree with you. But that still doesn't fully answer, should you have woken him up? Okay. The truth of the matter is that Dama ben Nisina was a guy, so we're not really showing halacha from him. We're really showing attitude. We're really showing Mesiras Nefesh from him. So even if he did a wrong thing, the Mesiras Nefesh you still see. Yeah.
What
that used instead some that couldn't get it.
No. So eventually they found it somewhere else. You know, they did get a replacement. Okay. Now the Chassam Sofer is made on this fascinating point. Why was it Binyamin's stone that popped out? Is it just an accident? Was there a special hashgacha pratis in Binyamin's stone popping out? Here's what the Chassam Sofer says. Binyamin, of all of the Shvatim, represents absolute love without any trace of sinas chinam. Because all the brothers who sold Yosef are guilty of sinas chinam. And even Yosef himself contributed to the machlokes and animosity because he brought Lashon Hara about the Shvatim to the brothers. So Yosef was involved in machlokes. Only Binyamin is pure and good in the sense that Binyamin is free of any taint of hatred. And that is why the Chassam Sofer says the word Shiftei Yeshurun, which although they are applying to the whole Jewish people, are specifically on Binyamin's stone, because the word Yeshurun, upright, is a reference to the Achdus of Klal Yisrael. How do we know this? Because in Moshe Rabbeinu's bracha, Vayihi Bishurun Melech, Hashem is the Melech in the nation of Yeshurun, B'Sasef Rashayam Yachad Shiftei Yisrael, when there's Achdus. So Yeshurun is the name that is given to Klal Yisrael when there is Achdus. And of all of the tribes, Binyamin is the highest level of Achdus. So why did that stone pop out? Because in the Bayis Sheni, what were we guilty of? Sinas Chinam. When we were guilty of Sinas Chinam, and as the Sinas Chinam got worse and worse and worse, we were no longer worthy of the designation Shiftei Yeshurun, and we were no longer worthy of the stone of Binyamin. And that popped out. So says the Chassam Sofer, when the Chachamim understood that this was the reason, and they finally got a Yashva stone, and they engraved Binyamin's name, because that's the halacha, they knew they could no longer use Shiftei Yeshurun. Because the Shem Yeshurun can only be used when there's Achdus and Avas Yisrael. And Memela, they changed it to Shiftei Ka, which apparently it was understood that was a kosher alternative engraving. And Memela, it's Miyushev. When the Gemara says the stone had Shiftei Yeshurun, that was before the Yashva stone popped out of the Choshen. And when the Rambam says Shiftei Ka, that was what they did on the replacement stone, when they saw they were no longer worthy. And indeed, that's exactly why the Urim V'Tumim stopped working, because Nevuah left when there's Sinas Chinam. It's all connected. The Nevuah requires Avas Yisrael. When there's no Nevuah, when there's no Avas Yisrael, you will lose the power of Nevuah. Okay, so that's a little bit about the Urim V'Tumim, a little bit about the Choshen, the Lo B'Shamayim He. It's interesting that I saw that Rav Meir Tzvi Bergman, who was, I think he was Nifter, but he was Rav Shach's son-in-law, but a very chashuv Rosh Yeshiva, makes an interesting point that a lot of times the Gemara has shaylas in halacha, and when the shayla is unresolved, there's a word teku. Now teku actually means Aramaic, let the matter stand, unresolved, but the Welt says of Ort that teku is an abbreviation, Tishbi, Yitaretz, Kushos, Ubayos. Tishbi. Eliyahu from Tishbi, Tishbi was his city, will answer all of these questions. So note that it calls him Tishbi. Now, we have other cases in the Gemara where we have doubts about monetary matters, and it says, Yehei munach ad sheyavo Eliyahu. The matter will remain in place until Eliyahu comes. So how come sometimes it's Yehei munach ad sheyavo Eliyahu, and sometimes it's Tishbi Yitaretz? kushos, ubayos. It's the same meaning, Eliyahu Hanavi. So Rabbi Bergman says, I think he quotes it from somebody, actually he doesn't say who, he says Shamati. Really, really nice answer. He says like this: Tekus are questions of halacha. Questions of halacha, a Navi cannot resolve. That's lo b'shamayim. So if Eliyahu Navi is going to help us out, he's not going to help us out because he's a Navi. He's going to help us out because he's a Talmid Chacham that has smicha. So Tishbi just says, the man from Tishbi. It doesn't call him a Navi. It does not refer to anything supernatural. As a Chacham, Eliyahu Navi has the same right as anyone else to be mafalpel. So when it comes to halachic issues, the man from Tishbi is going to help us out. Now, in the Yehei Munach, those are factual questions. For example, one person gave you $100 to watch, and one person gave you $200 to watch, and you don't remember which one. So Eliyahu Hanavi will tell you which one gave you the money. That's a factual question. Did Reuven give you the 200, or did Shimon give you the 200? On that, Nevuah helps. So Memela, Yehei Munach Achiyavo Eliyahu, Nevuah, Eliyahu Hanavi, that's referring to Mitzias. Tishbi Yitaretz is referring to halacha, where Eliyahu can help you out only as a chacham. That's really a Gavaldic terrace, beautiful terrace. The only question I have with this, I don't know why. If it's a question of just needing a chacham, Eliyahu was a chacham, of course, but I don't know why you would be misyaches to Eliyahu as the chacham. If it's a Navi, so he's the first Navi that comes. So I'm not sure why Eliyahu would have predominance in the realm of Chachma, but nevertheless, that's how he wants to learn. By the way, even Hashem could be a Chacham. It's very interesting. There is from the Balei HaTaisus a book that's called Shelos Utshuvos Min HaShamayim. You can get this, the Sefer is available. One of the Balei HaTaisus had dreams in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu was asked Shailas, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave answers. And he put this in a sefer. She'elos utshuvos min hashamayim. So the kasha is obvious. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can't paskin halacha. Lo b'shamayim. The answer is this. The answer is an amazing answer. If Hashem would just say, mutter, usher, yes, no, we wouldn't listen to it. But Hashem has the same right that you have to bring rayas. And this is pilpul. Hashem brings a raya from a Taisus, and Hashem brings a raya from a Gemara. It says, Hashem has the right to talk. We're not going to exclude him. And we evaluate the Eibishter's arguments like any other chacham. It's an amazing thing. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he sits in the Beis Medrash, has no particular hierarchy over you. He gives his rayas, and if the chachamim don't like it, they can dispute it. So, Lo b'shamayim, he says Hashem can't just say yes or no. But he can give arguments, and those arguments can become part of halachic discussion. And that is the basis of Shelos Utshuvos Min HaShamayim. Okay.